Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started now, and we're going to take a look at the joints and articulations section. This is the last section on on the bones. So, and if this goes quickly, we'll have time to do to at least introduce the section on skeletal muscles. Bring this up. Here we go. Joints and articulations. Okay, joints and articulations in our bodies. Articulations are where two bones come together. When they come together, it is a joint. And there is usually there can be movement at the joint, there can be no movement at the joint. So we classify these structures, what we call the joints and articulations, as we classify them by both movement, how they move, freely movable, slightly movable, or immovable, or structure, how are they made. So this is the two ways of classifying our the joints in our bodies. So an articulation is where two bones come together. That's all it is. Two bones come together. It can be like our knee, it can be our shoulder, it can be our elbow, it can be at our ankle, it can be at our hip. Those are articulations. And we have three different types of joints here based on movement. We have what is known as immovable, we have slightly movable, and we have freely movable. So a immovable joint is called a synarthrotic joint. Synarthrotic, immovable. We generally consider the sutures in the skull or the mental symphysis, where the mandible has come together. The teeth in our sockets are all immovable joints, as is the first, what we call the costosternal joint, where the ribs come together with the sternum. So if we take a look here at our skull, we would see these suture lines, for example, that we see right here. These are an immovable joint. Those joints don't move, they don't give, they don't have any play at all. If we look at the teeth in the sockets, that's also an immovable joint. They don't move at all. There's no flexibility, there's no give here. These are what we call the immovable joint or the synarthrotic joint. At some point they probably did. I know that the bones of our skull had some give. We had the fontanelles there to give us some give as our brain continues to grow. But once we reach adulthood, that all stops. Now, the amphiarthrotic joints are the slightly movables. And I don't care if you call them synarthrotic, amphiarthrotic, or diarthrotic, or just remember them as immovable, slightly movable, or freely movable. You can use either term here. The slightly movable joints, the intervertebral disc, the pads between the vertebrae, those are slightly movable joints. Our vertebrae have to have a certain amount of play in there to move around. They have to have a little bit of give. The joints between the ribs and the sternum from below number one, below rib number one, because our ribs have to rise up and go back down when the intercostal muscles contract so that we can breathe. Our pubic symphysis, the structure between the two pubic bones in the front of the pelvic in front of the pelvic, two pubic bones come together there in the front of the pelvic girdle. That's where I was looking for, the pelvic girdle. That is a slightly movable joint because the pubic symphysis has to have, excuse me, a certain amount of give there too, because it absorbs shock that comes up our legs. Those are all slightly movable joints. And the freely movable joints, the diarthrotic joints, are the shoulder, the hip, the knee, the fingers, the toes, the tarsal bones, and the carpal bones. For example, here is a freely movable joint. This is our clavicle. It is our humerus and clavicle and scapula. In this model, let me show this. This shows the connective tissue and muscles. Here we have the clavicle right here. Here's our scapula here, and there's the humerus. This comes together to form the the pectoral girdle, and gives us that free range of motion at our shoulder. Here's another freely movable joint. This is the knee joint right here, the most complex joint in our body. It allows our knee to flex like this, and the femur and the tibia rest on top of supporting pads here. It gives us great stability and yet allows us to bend in one direction. We don't like to bend the opposite way or slide to the side, but this is also a freely movable joint. One more example. Here is our olecranon. There's our olecranon process right there, otherwise known as our elbow. Here we see it from the posterior surface, showing all the connective tissue and muscles around it. The bone that's coming out here, where my finger is the radius. And this one flexes like this, or rather flexes like this. Because there's the elbow. The humerus doesn't flex like that. The humerus shouldn't flex like that anyway. Okay. Let me get back to sharing the screen. So those are the freely movable joints. Little detail here, the movable joints are the synarthrotics. They are separated by a very thin layer of connective tissue. The bones in here, like the bones in the skull, have a very thin layer of connective tissue helping to hold that joint together. In our mouth, where our teeth fit into the sockets, the gum fauces, there is a thin layer of connective tissue, a ligament that holds them in the socket. It's referred to as the periodontal ligament. If you've ever had a tooth extracted, that ligament is the one that gets stretched as the dentist is going to actually pry that tooth out of the socket. That ligament is very powerful and holds it in there. And dentists are fond of saying, now you're going to feel a lot of pressure, but you're not going to feel any pain when the tooth gets extracted. And if they do it right, that's exactly what happens. There are the sutures. And the gum fauces are the teeth in the sockets. They're challenging to get them out. They're not supposed to let go. The sutures in our skull don't let go either. Slightly movable joints. I mentioned the symphyses. We have these amphiarthrotic joints are usually held together or connected by cartilage, either hyaline cartilage or fiber cartilage. The hyaline cartilage is present at the ribs. Where the ribs articulate against the sternum are going to be hyaline cartilage. We have a little bit of flexibility there since our ribs have to expand and contract when we take a breath. The pubic symphysis and the intervertebral disc are both fibrocartilage. And so we have, these are all examples here of these slightly movable, the slight give we have here. The symphysis, of course, in the middle of the pelvic girdle. I remember the word that time. The pubic symphysis, where the two where the pubic bones come together. There's another term here called a syndesmosis. This is the ankle. The syndesmosis is a series of 2 or 3 ligaments that attach the fibula to the tibia and hold the fibula tight to the tibia. Remember, the outside of our ankle, the lateral malleolus is the end of the fibula. The fibula. The lateral malleolus is the fibula. It is anchored with a series of ligaments to both the tibia and to the talus bone. It is the weak part of our ankle. It's the lateral side of our ankle, the part that if you put your hand down, you can touch the outside, the ankle on the lateral surface of your foot, and you're touching the lateral malleolus, the end of the fibula, and it is a pretty weak structure because typically if we're going to hurt our ankle, we're going to roll our ankle to the outside and we're going to sprain those ligaments. This is a syndesmosis. Ankle sprains involve stretching or even tearing those ligaments. Now here we see on the left, we see let me get my thing here, come on, there we go. You can see the ligaments attaching, here's the fibula right there, over here's the tibia. The talus is sort of hidden there, but here's the calcaneus. Here, we can see a ligament holding the fibula to the calcaneus, a ligament holding the fibula to the talus, and there's also another one holding it to the tibia. So that's all that holds that ankle together on that side. It's a very weak structure. When we roll our ankle, we nearly always roll to the outside, and we can tear those ligaments. But this is a slightly movable, an amphiarthrotic joint, and so it's very easy to stretch those. So a sprained ankle. Remember, there is no ankle bone. A sprained ankle involves rolling the foot usually to the outside, stretching or tearing those ligaments. And of course, I already showed you this. This is the pubic symphysis. You can see it shows up here. It is soft tissue, so it doesn't show up as anything except a dark spot. So slightly movable joint. Pubic symphysis, the intervertebral disc, these are all fibrocartilage. The syndesmosis is the connection between the talus, the calcaneus, the fibula, and the tibia. Okay. Intervertebral disc right there. Now, the third category are the freely movable diarthrotic joints. This is everything else. Most of the joints in our body are going to be diarthrotic joints. We don't have a lot of symphyses. We don't have a lot of sutures. We don't have a lot of sockets. We don't have a lot of connections like we have with the end of the tibia and the fibula. Now, the end of the ulna and the radius are held together like that too. But that's about it. Everything else is going to be diarthrotic, freely movable joints. The knee, the phalanges, both in the hand and in the foot, the arm and the leg, these are all going to be diarthrotic joints. The elbow, the knee, the movement of our fingers, everything here is going to be diarthrotic joints. We have more diarthrotic, freely movable joints than anything else. Now, our bones are going to be covered with hyaline cartilage on their ends. We do that to prevent any kind of friction, because our bodies hate friction. They don't like to have anything causing friction here. So we cover the ends of the bones, but we also put these bones inside a capsule. These freely movable joints are held inside a capsule, The capsule looks something like this that we see here on our model of the elbow. This is what the capsule looks like right here. And that capsule totally surrounds the articulation between the two ends of the bones. Now here we have, at the elbow, we have the olecranon process right here articulating with the humerus. So we cover that in a complete capsule. So what does that capsule do for us? Well, the capsule is filled with a fluid. The fluid has a consistency of heavyweight oil, very like heavyweight motor oil. It's almost like a gel. And the bones never touch. The ends of the bones there never touch each other. They articulate within this fluid. And even if they were to touch, they would have hyaline cartilage on the surface of the bones anyway, so they don't rub together. And so when the olecranon process moves, when we move our arm at the elbow, when we flex or extend our arm, we are not touching bone to bone. This fluid, this what we call synovial fluid, allows us to have this movement without direct contact. And so that all of our freely movable joints are held in these capsules and have this super thick lubricating fluid around the ends of the bones, because if those bones were to rub together, it would start hurting. And what we do find over time is we lose the ability to make enough fluid in those joints. The synovial fluid runs out. We don't make it as fast as we're losing it. And then the ends of the bones will rub. And when they rub, they're gonna hurt. They may not hurt initially, but they will eventually start hurting. And when bones rub together, they create bone spurs, and sometimes the bones fuse together, or it just hurts to move. And what do we do if something hurts to do it? We don't do it. So we stop moving our fingers because it hurts to move our fingers. Or we stop walking because it hurts to move our knee. Or we stop, whatever we do, whatever activity we do, we become less active. And the longer we're less active, the more difficult it is to get those bones limbered up and moving again. And so we try to make sure that we, if we have problems at a joint, we try to fix it. So that is the type of, that's our joints by movement. The immovable, think of the bones in the skull, the sutures in the skull. Those are the immovable joints. The slightly movable, the symphysis, the intervertebral disc, even the end of the tibia and the fibula there. And then, of course, the freely movable is everything else. Now, by structure, your joints are going to be either fibrous, a fibrous joint, or a cartilaginous joint. You probably guess which ones those are already. And the synovial joint. The synovials are the freely movables. Fibrous joints, held together by connective tissue. The sutures of the skull are, not only are they immovable joints, but they are fibrous joints. They have connections. The connective tissue attaches from one suture line across the suture line and holds these bones together. So these are the immovable joints. We don't want them to move. We want them to be nice and rigid, because at an adult age, your brain is no longer growing. So we don't need to allow the skull to expand anymore. The synostosis is a fibrous joint. The one at the end of the fibula and the tibula is a fibrous joint. The ligaments, the connective tissue fibers that hold that joint together, are a fibrous joint. The same with the teeth. That's a fibrous joint. The periodontal ligament holds the tooth in the socket. The end of the tibia and fibula, and the end of the ulna and the radius, not the elbow end, but the end close to the carpals, is a fibrous joint. Cartilaginous joints don't have any kind of cavity either. They have a little bit of motion here. The one we haven't mentioned are the epiphyseal plates in the long bones. We talked about the costosternal joints. They are cartilaginous. Costosternal joint is cartilaginous. We have hyaline cartilage attached to the ribs. We have fibrocartilage for the pubic symphysis. We've got fibrocartilage for the intervertebral discs here. But the epiphyseal plates is something new. In our long bones, like the humerus and the phalanges are long bones too, even though they're little, and the femur and the tibia and the fibula, all of these bones have growth plates growing at each end, the distal end, the far end, and the proximal end of it, the top and the bottom of the bone. They're going to have growth plates there. And those growth plates are based on hyaline cartilage. Long bones grow lengthwise from these two growth areas until we reach our adult stature. And what happens is that there's hyaline cartilage in there, and it grows and is converted, and the hyaline cartilage is converted to bone. And so our bones grow lengthwise. Later, after we have reached our adult stature, our bones can only grow sideways. They can get larger, they can get thinner. You know, an astronaut on the space station, their bones are going to shrink because there's no gravity pulling on those bones to force them to work harder. And so they will shrink. But when they come back to Earth and they start exercising again, their bones will get larger. They will lay down more bone. They will have lateral growth, but they'll no more lengthwise growth. There's our example there of the hyaline cartilage at the end of the ribs. Yeah. Okay, these are the epiphyseal plates. We can look at an X-ray of an individual's bones and determine the age of that person by looking at the X-ray. A child or a young adult or an adolescent would likely have what we see in the left-hand side. They would see a dark line. The dark line there is the epiphyseal plate. Here we see it on the left-hand side. We see it on the femur. Here's the femur. Here is the epiphyseal plate right there. And here is the epiphyseal plate on the tibia. There's the femur. There's the tibia. Even the fibula gets in on the action a little bit here. The reason it's a dark line is because it's soft tissue, hyaline cartilage. Soft tissue doesn't show up in X-ray. It's not that there's this gap in the leg, but the dark line is where we have soft tissue. The X-ray is going right through there. That is all hyaline cartilage, and that is where bone growth is taking place. However, once we get to about 23 or 24 years of age, the hyaline cartilage is all converted to bone, and it shows up as a white line. We have a scar here and here and in here. So you can tell a lot about the age of an individual just by looking at the X-rays of their long bones. Have the bones closed? Then they're older than 25. You know, you may just find a set of bones. You know, you may be working in a forensic capacity. You have a set of bones are brought in. It happens all the time. You read about it in the paper all the time or on the news. Skeleton found, you know, wherever. And so the bones are brought in, and the first thing you can do is X-ray the bones, and it will give you an idea at least of the age of the individual. If that line if there's a dark line present in long bones, it means that they're probably under about 23 or 24, no more than 25. If it's closed, they're above 25. So that, you know, that's the first thing you can tell from this. Because all of us, once we get to about 25, our long bone growth doesn't occur anymore. We've reached our adult stature. Yeah.
These are growth plates, right?
Those are growth plates.
What happens when we damage one?
Okay, that's a good question.
Because I damaged both of mine and my feet, and both feet
Uh-huh.
I damaged them. I'm just wondering what happens.
The, well, that's a good question. I'll tell you that my nephew, when he was about 14 years old, fractured his humerus at a growth plate. And then the following year, he decided to fracture it again at the same growth plate. And the thought was that that is automatically a weaker area because it's cartilage, not bone. Now, have you had any long-term effects? Well, that's to be expected because by fracturing those plates, you're bringing those bones into greater contact. So you're going to get some pain out of that. So the good news is that it's fine, not great. Good news is that everybody gets arthritis. So you're just ahead of the game.
He said, obviously, I guess TCC.
So it happens. You know, it is a weaker spot because it isn't solid bone. It isn't strong bone there. It's cartilage, and cartilage does give, but it can also be damaged. You know, and when my nephew tried to ride his bicycle down a hill standing on top of the seat, he found out that bones break. So what was the really dumb thing was he tried to do it again the following year. It broke it again. So anyway, those are the growth plates. We'll talk about them in lecture 2, but they're very definitive. You know, they're closed usually by the time you're dealing with a patient. They're closed usually by the time they're 25. So once everything closes, then you're likely going to maybe a lot of your pain will go, your arthritis problems will go away. Hopefully. So, okay, now something else to point out now. What about being double jointed? Let me move this out of the way here. We've all heard the term double jointed. We've all known people that can, you know, twist their hands in strange positions or park their ankles behind their neck, you know, and there's no such thing. No one usually has a second set of joints. What you do have with a person that's considered to be double jointed is extra flexibility on the ligaments. They're extra stretchy. They allow you to move your bones in positions that normally you can't. Most of us can't take our phalanges and bend the tip of the finger down, you know. So no, most of us can't do that, but some people can. Some people have so much flexibility that they can bend the tips of their fingers down while holding their fingers straight, you know, like that. Yeah, she's one of them, you know. So, but you know, one of our sons is like that. He's extra stretchy. The other one isn't, you know. So, but it's just, you know, all it is extra stretchiness. That's all. Now, so they're not, you know, is it worth getting into a discussion, an argument over? No, it's not worth that. So now here is another point though that can probably cause some trouble too. Anybody like to crack their knuckles? Have you ever been told it's going to cause arthritis? It's not. Don't worry. You know, all you're doing when you crack your knuckles is relieving air pressure inside the joint. That's all. It has nothing to do with arthritis. 90% of the population is going to develop arthritis anyway. Arthritis, osteoarthritis is wear and tear arthritis. It's the price we pay for being alive. We're all going to get it at some point, to some degree. And relieving the pressure doesn't do a thing. Relieving the air pressure doesn't do a thing, you know, because we've all heard that. That's an urban legend, you know. It's, you know, probably been around for 100 years, 1,000 years. Don't crack your knuckles, you'll get arthritis. It's sort of like, don't sit too close to the TV, it'll hurt your eyes. Ever hear that one too? Also not true. Has nothing to do with your eyes. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. But so there is no such thing as being double jointed. It just means extra stretchy. And of course, I always like to pop the cracking your knuckles thing. So now, our synovial joints. This is the third type by structure. This is the fluid-filled structure. Most of the joints in our bodies are synovial joints. They have synovial fluid, which is this goopy gel that surrounds both ends of the bone. Now you can see that these are two phalanges here. And in this space that we have right in here, this is the capsule. The capsule surrounds the joint. In this space in here is where the fluid is located, and we will continue to make this fluid from the membrane that lines the capsule, the synovial membrane lining the capsule. And it's a very thick, goopy gel, but it allows the movement to occur without the bone ends touching. So we don't want the bone ends touching. The bone ends touch, we'll get friction and we'll get wear and tear on the bone ends, and then gradually it'll hurt so much that we will stop moving our fingers or our wrist or whatever bones are touching here. So, but this is how we get our great flexibility of moving our fingers or our elbow or, our wrist or our hip or whatever we're doing, because of this synovial capsule filled with this fluid. It has the consistency, maybe like pancake syrup or even thicker, a real thick gel on here. Or if you, how about corn syrup? Have you ever made pecan pie? And you mix the corn syrup. You know how thick that is and how it pours out really slowly. That's probably the consistency of the synovial fluid in these joints, so that we have this flexibility, because we can do things and it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to move. If it hurts, it's because our bones are rubbing together probably, or they're inflamed or something. So, yeah. Okay. Freely movable synovial joint. I said that the knee is the most complex of the joints, but the shoulder has probably the greatest range of mobility, because our shoulder allows us to move our arm almost in a full 360 degrees. This shoulder joint here, the capsule surrounds the head of the humerus and the glenoid cavity. It also surrounds part of the acromion and part of the clavicle. And so we have this very powerful joint here held in place so that it holds our humerus in the socket, and we can rotate almost a full 360 degrees around. I mean, look at the range of motion that they have here on the individual on this. So we have a pretty good range of motion in here. And the more we exercise, the more range of motion we get. Okay. Now, something else we encounter to guarantee that we don't have friction is cushioning. We have lots of cushioning at these joints, at these synovial joints. We have cushions between the capsule, and we have cushions between the bones themselves and where they rub. We have cushions between the capsule and the ligaments and the tendons. One of the first things we encounter when we're looking at these structures are the pads of fibrocartilage called the meniscus. The meniscus is a pad that we see here. Let me show you on. This is our knee, and this right here is a pad. Let me bring this out. There we go. You see the two pads here, one on the left side and one on the right side. These are called the menisci. Here, here, and here. And the meniscus sit on top of the tibia, and the femur sits on top of the meniscus. And so if you hear of someone who's had an injury that they've torn their meniscus on the left side, they're tearing one of those cartilage pads. That's one of the types of protection that we have. You know, the meniscus pad. It helps, you know, our femur sits on top of the pads, which are sitting on top of the tibia. It helps to stabilize our joint, plus we're not touching the tibia. We have them in our knee. We have them at the, believe it or not, where the sternum and the clavicle come together, you know, right next to the, you know, you have the manubrium at the top of the sternum, and you have the jugular notch, and you have the clavicular notches on either side. There are meniscus pads between the sternum and the clavicle there at the clavicular notch, so that they make sure we don't have any friction at that point. We also have them in the jaw, so that we don't have any friction when our mandible moves up against the underside of the skull or against the maxilla. So those are the pads of fibrocartilage there. And you know, like any good cartilage, they can get torn and injured. It happens. You know, again, the comment, well, they tore their cartilage in their left knee. Well, it happens, you know, because cartilage can get torn. Now, the other thing we encounter are sacs, bags of synovial fluid. Not in the capsule. This is a separate structure. These are called bursa sacs. It is a bag of connective tissue filled with synovial fluid. And we pack them into areas where ligaments can rub up against other ligaments, or against bone, or against muscles, where the movement of the ligament or the tendon against the bone would irritate the tendon, or up against the muscle where it would irritate the muscle. So we do this to isolate these structures so they're not rubbing against each other. Anybody ever have carpal tunnel? You know what carpal tunnel is? It's inflammation of the tendons in your forearm. You get it from repetitive motion. You know, whether you are typing, working on a keyboard, whether you are doing some type of repetitive motion. You know, you see it a lot in industry where people are working as meat cutters and they're doing this kind of action all the time, or roofers or painters, where they're doing this kind of action all the time. You inflame the tendons in here. The tendons are normally surrounded by a capsule, a long capsule of bursa filled with synovial fluid, but that if you constantly irritate it, it'll become inflamed, it'll hurt. And it takes several weeks to heal up. One summer, I painted the outside of my house. I did this all day long for 3 weeks. And the following week, I couldn't raise my arm any higher than this because it hurt. I inflamed the tendons in here because it was this constant repetitive motion. Can you imagine working in a food industry where you're doing this all day long on different types of foods? I went to college in Virginia, and in the county where my college was located, we had a whole bunch of poultry processing plants, turkey plants, and they'd be doing 30 or 40,000 birds a day. And they had just lines, it was assembly line, and you'd stand there with your knife, your very sharp knife, with your stainless steel glove on, and you slice, 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 slice all day long. And that's all you get, They say it paid well, but it was probably pretty unpleasant. But the point was, many people would come out of there with lots of repetitive motion injuries. So now, so the bursa are well, like here we see, this is a really hard picture to understand what you're looking at, but this structure, come on, it doesn't want me to, there we go. This is the head of the humerus right here. This is the acromion right here. And this is the ligament. This ligament, the coracoid process, coracoid is over here, and the acromion's here, and there's a ligament between the two, and there's a big bursa sac in between. So that at our shoulder, where we would have the acromion and the coracoid, here's the acromion, it's the acromion is the flat structure. Here at your, this is the acromial end, the flat end, and here's the coracoid process over here, and there's a ligament connecting the two. You would have a bursa sac right in that area there, so it wouldn't hurt. Because, and lots of older people will, experience injuries in sports when they were younger, will often complain of bursitis in their shoulder or in their knee or in their elbow over time because of this. If they didn't get it treated properly. And for example, let's get back to this next picture. This shows you what can happen with bursa. Now, the bursa sac on the left-hand side on the picture, this is a bursa sac right there. It's in front of the patella. Here's the knee. This is the knee right there. And there is the bursa sac here. Here's the tendon that holds the knee and the patella in place. Now, if this bursa sac has been abused by constant work, when someone's working, on the floor, perhaps they're installing a floor and they're on their knees all day long, or they're installing cable. We had people working down in 206 last week, rewiring all the projector in there. We weren't worthy enough to get one, but I didn't take it personally. Or you're a roofer, or you're a mechanic, or you're doing something where you're working on your knees all day long. That bursa sac can only take so much pressure and it becomes inflamed. And on this side, this area where it's all white is the inflamed bursa, and it hurts. Well, there's the femur, over here's the femur, same angle. There's the tibia. The fibula is on the other side, but right here in front of the knee, right here in front of the patella, this is all inflamed in here. And it's going to cause a great deal of pain and limit movement because of the constant strain and pressure applied at that joint. So a lot of people experience this. There used to be a condition that occurred up through the 1940s and 50s. It was called housemaid's knee because women would be, when they would clean their floors, they would be on their knees with a bucket of cleaning fluid and a sponge or a brush to scrub. And where it really showed up was in the very dense urban areas, where you would have a cleaning crew come in and clean these large buildings every night. And it would be done by hand, down steps, down hallways, and you would have the cleaning people were mostly older women, and they'd be working like this all night long, and constant pressure on their knees, and they would end up with this inflammation like that. That's pretty much gone away. And you still have the cleaning crews, but they can do it now a lot more efficiently. You don't have this, have to be down on your knees with a scrub brush, scrubbing the floor. So at least I hope not anyway. Okay. But bursitis is still a condition that can occur when those bursa sacs are inflamed. And repetitive motion or constant pressure on them will cause this to occur. Okay, now, so here we have our knee, the largest, most complex diarthrotic joint in the body. It's not a true synovial joint in the sense that it is not completely surrounded. It's only surrounded on the sides and on the back, but in the front where the kneecap is located, it is the synovial cavity doesn't extend around there. It is three separate joints. It is a combination of the kneecap and the femur and the tibia and the femur. medial and lateral connections between the tibia and the femur and the kneecap and the femur. So the fibula is just watching. The fibula doesn't get to do anything. The best the fibula gets here is it gets attached to the femur by a ligament. That's it. Remember, the fibula is not a load-bearing bone. It doesn't participate. All it does is cause problems. So, okay. The knee is a hinge joint. It bends like a hinge right here. Doesn't go the other way. That's bad. It doesn't. The knee doesn't like to tilt forward. It can once, but that's never a good thing. Knee movement looks like this. This is how our typical hinge joint works. We see the tibia moves back and forth against the femur. You can't see the meniscus pads in there, but they're there. The tibia is held to the femur with a cartilage, and the fibula is held to the femur with a cartilage. You can just barely see that. Here is a little thing right there is a cartilage, and there's one on the other side holding the fibula in place. We'll leave that there for a while now. So, but you can see there is one of the ligaments. There's one on the other side that helps to hold the tibia and the femur together. Come on. Get this there. Now. So this is our knee. We're looking at the front of the knee with the kneecap and the patellar ligament pushed out of the way. So this perspective that you're seeing here is this, like this, yes, like this view. So the patella is pushed out of the way, and we're exposing the meniscus pads, and we're exposing what we call the anterior cruciate ligament. You've all heard of ACL injuries, I'm sure. Many people have experienced them. There are two ligaments that are attached at the tibia and the femur, the anterior cruciate ligament and the posterior cruciate ligament. They're called cruciate because they cross over each other, and cruciate means cross. So what we're seeing here is the anterior cruciate ligament. It is anchored in the front of the tibia right here in the space between the two condyles. And there's the patellar ligament. And let me go back. This will be this is the medial meniscus. This is the lateral meniscus. This is the medial condyle. This is the lateral condyle. And this is the femur up here. And this is the tibia down here. The anterior cruciate ligament is attached to the front of the tibia between its own condyles. Because the top of the tibia there, those are condyles also. So the anterior cruciate ligament attaches in the front there. Now let me erase all this. And we'll go take a look at this drawing here. So here we see a drawing, very nice drawing of the ACL and PCL on this knee. You can see here is in the front, we have the anterior cruciate ligament highlighted. It has a little red lightning bolt there on the side of it. It says the anterior cruciate ligament, it attaches to the anterior intercondylar area of the tibia, meaning it attaches to the front of the tibia between the tibia's condyles. Because here is, there we go. Here's the tibia. Here's the condyle for the tibia on each side. This is the medial condyle of the tibia. This is the lateral. It says lateral, trust me, condyle of the tibia. The space in between the anterior intercondylar area is this space. Why didn't you say in the front of the tibia? But right here is where the anterior cruciate ligament attaches on the front of the tibia. The posterior cruciate ligament attaches on the opposite side of the tibia on the posterior space between the two condyles. So if we're looking at the tibia from the top down, and here's the lateral condyle here, and there is the medial condyle here, the ACL attaches here, and the PCL attaches back here. So this is, because this is an intercondylar area in here. So the PCL attaches in the back. That's why they call it the posterior cruciate ligament. The anterior cruciate ligament attaches in the front. Now, they cross somewhere in the middle here. Now, the purpose of the ACL is to keep the tibia from sliding forward and hyperextending the knee. We don't want our tibia to go forward. The purpose of the PCL is to keep the tibia from sliding backwards. Now, where do they attach? We know where they attach on the tibia. They're going to attach to the femur. Where are they going to attach in the femur? Well, this is where it gets a little confusing. I mean, it's very straightforward, but it's just, you have to keep everything straight. So our tibia has a lateral condyle and a medial condyle. You can see it right there where the lateral condyle and the medial condyle are located. Now the medial condyle has a medial side and a lateral side. The medial side is on the big toe side of the leg. The lateral side's on the little toe side. Like, doesn't matter that it's the medial condyle. It's, it doesn't matter that if you're on the medial side of the if you're the medial condyle, you still have a medial side and a lateral side. So the ACL will attach on the lateral condyle. Lateral condyle is over here, lateral condyle of the femur, but here is the medial side of the lateral condyle. And this is the lateral side of the lateral condyle. Isn't that confusing? It looks something like this. If we look at forget the drawing, look at the animation here. There we go. This is the medial. This is the medial side here. This is the lateral this is the medial condyle, it's the lateral condyle. Notice that this is the PCL here because it's attached to the back of the tibia. And it inserts itself here on the lateral side of the medial condyle. The ACL, which is this one, ACL, inserts itself on the medial side of the lateral condyle. They cross over. So and if we watch it, you're back, we can see where the tear is gonna take place. It's a pretty strong tear, but that's the ACL tearing there. The ACL is attached to the lateral condyle. The PCL is attached to the medial condyle. They cross over, and when the knee gets stressed, when you either hyperextend the tibia, if the tibia slides forward, you tear the ACL. If the tibia slides backwards, you tear the PCL, and you have to have it surgically repaired. There's no way around it. And so we have this injury right there. Of course, you can see the meniscus and everything. That's great. But the tear, this is what you're seeing on the animation is your classic ACL tear right there. Now, here we're looking at the backside. This might, this is the same as the model. And what we're seeing here, this first large structure, well, there's the femur. There is the PCL, the posterior cruciate ligament. It's attached to the posterior intercondylar region here. This is the tibia. This is the posterior region. It attaches there, and it attaches to the medial condyle of the femur. There's the ACL right next to it. The ACL comes up from the front and attaches on the lateral condyle. Now, what's holding our tibia and our femur together and the fibula and the femur together are these two ligaments. There's a lateral collateral ligament attached from the femur to the fibula, and there's a medial collateral ligament attaching the femur to the tibia. So, but you can see we already have the PCL and the ACL anchoring the tibia and the femur together too. So there's a lot of structure there holding those two large bones together. I mean, this is all that the fibula gets, this one little ligament over here. You have the patellar ligament holding the kneecap attached to the femur and to the tibia. And you also have the medial collateral ligament holding the tibia and the femur together. Fibula just gets one ligament. Because it doesn't do a whole lot for us. Okay. Lateral meniscus, fibula, tibia. Remember that the fibula is always on the lateral side. There's the medial meniscus, lines up with the big toe. Always remember that the big toe is on the medial side, the little toes on the lateral side. There's our medial collateral ligament connecting the tibia and the femur together. Now, looking at the other side, there's our patellar ligament. There's that's another ligament holding the tibia and the femur together. So we got the patellar ligament, we got the medial collateral ligament, we got the ACL and the PCL holding the tibia and the femur together, and we also have the lateral collateral here holding the fibula to the femur. That's, because the fibula doesn't do a whole lot for us. Lateral collateral ligament. Remember that the fibula is on the lateral side. There's our femur. When our knee dislocates, just like when any other bone dislocates, it pops out of its socket. In this case, we don't have a socket, but what will happen is if the knee dislocates, it's going to hyperextend, for example. In this case, we've dislocated, we've popped out of the ligaments that are holding us in place. Now, it often means the ligament got torn. When we dislocate our shoulder, the head of the humerus pops out of the glenoid cavity. It's usually still attached, to all the muscles and to the ligaments there. Here, to get this to happen, we nearly always are going to have some sort of ligament damage. So now many people complain about knee pain. And as we age, as our patients age, they're going to have knee problems. The reason they do is because the ends of the condyles will wear away. They will get old. They will get worn out. And so will the patella, the condyles on both the tibia and on the femur. Now, knee replacement surgery is very straightforward. Knee replacement surgery involves cutting away all of the degraded material and using a set of artificial condyles on both the tibia and the femur and an artificial set of menisci in place. And the knee is repaired. And then we get the flexibility again with the prosthetic devices attached. In fact, I think, this is an artificial set of condyles for a knee. This is the top portion of the knee replacement that you saw on the animation there. This goes over the end of the femur, and now you have these artificial. These are titanium condyles, and then there's going to be a meniscus pad underneath there, some sort of synthetic pad, and then there'll be a counterpart to this on condyles on the end of the tibia. There we go. So this is a real set of condyles. So that's all replaced. Now we usually leave the medial and lateral collateral ligaments that attach the tibia and the femur together. The ACL and the PCL are still in place. The patellar ligament is still in place. We repaired the patella and it all still works. And after it's done, we look like this. Here's what the knee replacement looks like. The part that I showed you is the titanium part, the condyles of the femur with the artificial meniscus and the condyles of the tibia. And we've kept the ligaments intact. The ligaments are not removed. Everything is still there. The ACL and PCL are still there, as is the patellar ligament, as is the collateral ligaments. What you get is this flexibility in the knee that you lost over time. Many older people have knee surgery, usually maybe accompanying hip replacement, or maybe they'll do one and then do the other 6 months later. And it improves the quality of their life so dramatically. If you've known anybody, I know lots of older people at church that have had knee replacement and hip replacement, and it is amazing. They get their knees replaced, their hips replaced, and they get their cataracts removed, and it's like, they've lost 20 years of age, just like that. So anyway, now hip replacement. Hip replacement involves cutting off the end of the femur somewhere below, either at the level of the trochanters or below the trochanters. This is an artificial hip. This is the structure here is an artificial hip. This is the artificial head of the femur. And what will happen is the femur will be cut off somewhere below the trochanters, and then this will be slid down in the middle of the femur. And then this round ball can then fit into the acetabulum. Now the acetabulum will have a new covering, usually titanium covered with some sort of non-stick surface, so that this steel ball doesn't wear away the acetabulum. But this will go down all the way down the shaft of the femur, and usually to prepare the femur for that, we have what we call a bone rasp. It looks like this. You notice the very sharp edges there, and that goes down inside the cavity and roughs it up so you can stick this metal object down in there, often held in place with wiring and super glue. Is what an artificial humerus would look like. That's the socket for the glenoid cavity. Let me get back to my picture. So here, you're the first lab that gets to see them in person in 2 years. So hip replacement surgery is very common. You know, it used to be when someone broke their hip, 40 years ago, when someone broke their hip, they were dead, because the conventional wisdom was to surgically repair the hip, put pins in it, get them all into a body cast, put them in a hospital bed in traction for 6 months, and they'd be dead in 2 weeks. They haven't been inside a body, don't worry. So grandma would be dead in 2 weeks because she would be laying immobilized in her hospital bed in a great deal of pain because her bones weren't going back together right, and she would aspirate fluid into her lungs and develop pneumonia and die. And it happened more times than not. Somewhere along the way, the idea was, hey, you know, maybe instead of letting them be stuck in this hospital bed in a cast for 6 months, let's, instead of trying to get the body to repair the damage, let's repair the damage with an artificial hip. Because when a hip breaks, it's nearly always the neck of the femur. The neck of the femur gets weaker and weaker thanks to osteoporosis. It fractures, grandma falls down, you know, and conventional wisdom 40 years ago was to put her into a body cast. That would either kill her or grandpa or whoever. Now, you know, they have their surgery on a Monday, they're home by Wednesday. They're walking with a walker by the weekend, the following week of pain, and the following week after that, nothing. They're walking perfectly fine. And they don't die because you get them out, you know, because your patient's laying there in the hospital bed for 6 months, they're flat on their back and their legs elevated, and so they will gradually aspirate fluid. Saliva will work its way down into the lungs, and they'll develop pneumonia, and pneumonia in that weakened state with their immune response has been compromised, they'll die. That doesn't happen very often anymore because we can fix this. So now this is what you've seen going around there. The femoral stem, some are short, some are long, some are wired in place, some are wired and literally super glued in place. We nearly always have to have a replacement for the acetabulum because it's worn away too. And so you have to insert this prosthetic replacement in there, and then they'll snug together, and they're good for at least 10 years. But it adds a tremendous amount of quality of life to your patient. And it's a very straightforward procedure anymore. And it looks like this. Look at the range of motion you get. You know, here we see the X-ray showing, you know, the cut looks like it was made right about the level of the trochanter in here. They run this down the medullary into the medullary cavity, the shaft of the long bone. This side looks like it's probably a candidate for the same thing. You'll notice bone should be white. The calcium and the phosphorus in the bones should be reflected by X-ray, and this should all be white. The gray area and the darker areas indicate there's not a lot of bone left. So this person, this female, is a candidate. How do I know it's a female? Yes, you're exactly right. So this area right here, the inverted bowl shape at the pelvic arch, the pubic arch right there. So this is a female. Most older males don't generally develop osteoporosis. They can, but generally your people that have a hip fracture are going to be your older female patients. Not to say that grandpa can't do it too, but you're going to have more older female patients fracturing their hips. Now, both males and females will have their hip replacements and give them that range of motion again. But you're going to see osteoporosis is going to affect more females than males. And we'll talk about that in the lecture, why that exactly happens too. So, okay. Yeah. And that is joints and articulation. And that took me much longer than I thought it would. So we're not going to get into muscles today, so don't worry about that. Anybody have any questions on any of this? So I appreciate your patience, and we will get back to muscles. The good news about muscles is it only takes about an hour to go through all the muscles we're going to be looking at. So we'll just do that when we get back from break. Okay, I will see everybody in lecture on Thursday, and we'll probably wrap up the chapter on metabolism at that point. If there are no questions, I'll get us out of here. So.